Hello friends, welcome to another edition of Remnant Informer Presents. Peter was not a supreme pontiff. Scripture gives no indication that Peter was supreme over all the other disciples. In fact, the four Gospels indicate that no apostle held a supreme position in New Testament times. All the New Testament verses that speak of Peter are virtually silent regarding any alleged supremacy on his part. It is noteworthy that in Luke 22:24 through 30, just prior to the time of Christ's arrest and crucifixion, some of the disciples got into an argument regarding who among them would be considered the greatest. One must wonder why the disciples would continue to even ask this question if the issue had been settled with Peter having emerged as God's choice for some supreme position. The very fact that such discussions took place shows that no apostle had attained a supreme position during Jesus' 3-year ministry. Jesus treated each of the disciples with an equal level of respect and trust. Now, I want to ask a question. If Peter was supreme, why did the disciples continue to debate among themselves who would be considered the greatest? Luke 22:24 through 30. Further, there is no single epistle in the New Testament where we find any evidence of Peter being called a pope, nor is there any mention of a papacy. Instead, we find all the disciples working together on a seemingly equal level of authority. If indeed Peter were in a supreme position of power, he would have said something in his second epistle to the effect that his readers would be sure to follow his successor in Rome. After all, Peter was getting on in the years and would have supported the papacy had such a papacy existed. But Peter did no such thing because there was no such papacy. Another argument we can make note of is the fact that the Apostle Paul affirmed in 2 Corinthians 12 and 11 that he was not inferior to any of the other apostles. Paul would not have said this had a papacy been in existence. It is also highly revealing that while Peter is prominent in the first 12 chapters of the books of Acts, the Apostle Paul is a prominent figure in chapters 13 through 28. This would not make sense if Peter were the Pope. Further, when Paul lists the authority structure in the early church in 1 Corinthians 12 and 28, there is no mention of a pope, and God has appointed the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers. 1 Corinthians 12 and 28. Question: how could the Apostle Paul affirm he was not inferior to any other apostle in 2 Corinthians 12:11 if Peter had risen to a position of supremacy? If Peter had risen to a position of supremacy, why is the Apostle Paul the prominent figure in Acts 13 through 28? If God intended that there be a papacy, why didn't he include it in the authority structure of the church as outlined in 1 Corinthians 12:28, which includes apostles, prophets, and teachers? Further, in the books of Acts, we find a detailed history of the early church, and there is no mention or even a hint of the existence of a papacy. Nor is there the slightest hint of Petrine supremacy. Instead, we find verses that indicate that Peter was not in a supreme position. For example, we read that the apostles sent Peter and John to Samaria after they heard about God's work in Samaria, Acts 8:14. Peter would have done the sending had he been supreme. As well, Peter certainly plays no supreme role in the Jerusalem Council. See Acts 15:1-35. For he is portrayed as one among a number of apostles. Instead, James seems to be the person of dominance. There, see verses 13-35. Question: if Peter was supreme, wouldn't he be the one sending others instead of being sent by others of Samaria? Acts 8:14. If Peter was supreme, why does it seem that James was the dominant person at the Jerusalem Council? Acts 15:13-35. Thanks for watching. As always, I stand by the word. God bless.